Stop her! No one steals the Alpha King's horse and rides away alive! The cry echoed across the valley just as the first rays of dawn spilled over the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the endless fields in streaks of gold. Every guard in the royal escort turned at once, stunned by the impossible sight racing toward the eastern hills. A young woman with windswept chestnut hair leaned low over the neck of a magnificent black stallion, her hands steady on the reins as the powerful animal flew across the open prairie with effortless speed. Dust rolled behind them in thick clouds while the royal banners disappeared farther into the distance. The horse beneath her was no ordinary mount. Every wolf in the Northern Territories recognized Midnight, the Alpha King's legendary stallion, a creature so fiercely loyal that no stranger had ever managed to climb onto its back, let alone convince it to run. Yet somehow the impossible had happened. The horse obeyed her. Behind her, dozens of mounted royal guards struggled to keep pace, but Midnight was faster than every horse in the kingdom. At the center of the pursuit rode a tall man wrapped in a dark traveling cloak. His silver eyes never left the woman disappearing over the rolling hills. He did not shout. He did not panic. His expression remained unreadable, though every rider around him could feel the quiet storm gathering beneath his calm. His name was Lucian Ashford, the Alpha King whose authority united every pack from the northern forests to the southern rivers. Kings had challenged him. Rival Alphas had underestimated him. None had ever dared steal from him. Until today. And the strangest part was not that someone had taken his horse. It was that the woman fleeing from him was his own wife. Evelyn Carter had spent an entire year believing she knew the quiet blacksmith she had married. He repaired horseshoes with patient hands, smiled rarely, and disappeared for work whenever distant villages needed help. He preferred simple clothes, modest meals, and peaceful evenings beside their small cabin near Pine Hollow Creek. She had never questioned why respected travelers always greeted him with unusual courtesy or why strangers occasionally bowed ever so slightly before continuing on their way. She had dismissed every mystery because love often asked people to trust before it explained. But trust became harder to hold after the night she discovered the hidden cellar beneath their home. Locked behind an old wooden door rested polished armor engraved with the royal crest, maps marked with military routes, sealed letters carrying the insignia of every major pack, and a ceremonial cloak stitched with silver thread reserved for only one man in the kingdom. Her husband had never been a wandering blacksmith. He had been living beside her behind the greatest secret the kingdom had ever kept. Evelyn had not cried. She had not confronted him. Instead, before sunrise, she had walked quietly to the royal stable, looked directly into Midnight's intelligent dark eyes, whispered words only the horse seemed to understand, and ridden away with the one thing she knew Lucian would never ignore. Because if the Alpha King refused to tell his wife the truth, then the wife who had stolen his horse would force him to listen. The pounding rhythm of Midnight's hooves echoed through the wide valley as Evelyn guided the powerful stallion toward the forgotten trails that only local ranchers still remembered. She knew these hills better than any royal scout because she had grown up exploring every creek, every narrow pass, and every stretch of pine forest that surrounded Pine Hollow Creek. The cool morning air brushed against her face, but it did little to quiet the questions racing through her mind. 1 year earlier, she had believed fate had finally smiled upon her after years of hardship. Her father had passed away when she was only 18, leaving behind a small blacksmith shop buried beneath debt and worn-out equipment. Most people in the neighboring towns assumed the business would fail within months. Then one rainy afternoon a quiet stranger had stepped inside carrying a damaged horseshoe and asking if she could repair it. His clothes were simple. His boots were dusty from travel. His smile was reserved but genuine. He introduced himself only as Lucian. Over the following weeks he returned. Again and again with small jobs, always finding another reason to visit the little forge. Sometimes he brought fresh apples from nearby orchards. Sometimes he quietly repaired broken fences before sunrise without expecting payment. When heavy snow buried the road during winter, she woke to find every path around the house already cleared. He never asked for recognition. He simply appeared whenever life became difficult. The people of Pine Hollow quickly grew fond of the mysterious blacksmith who worked harder than anyone else while speaking less than everyone around him. They called him dependable. They called him honest. Evelyn eventually called him her husband. Their wedding had been beautifully ordinary beneath the old white oak overlooking the creek, attended by neighbors who laughed, shared homemade pies, and wished the young couple a peaceful future. Lucian had promised her only one thing that afternoon. He would always keep her safe. Looking back now, Evelyn realized he had never promised he would always tell her the truth. Tiny memories returned with startling clarity, as midnight carried her farther from the royal escort. There had been evenings when Lucian disappeared after sunset, explaining that nearby farms needed emergency repairs. Sometimes he returned before dawn with fresh scratches on his hands that looked nothing like the marks left by iron or horseshoes. There were mornings when unfamiliar riders wearing expensive cloaks quietly waited outside their cabin, speaking with him in low voices before disappearing into the forest without acknowledging her presence. Once she had awakened during a thunderstorm and found him standing alone outside, staring toward the distant mountains where lightning illuminated the silhouette of Blackstone Castle nearly 30 miles away. At the time she had assumed he was simply lost in thought. Now every forgotten detail settled into place like pieces of a puzzle she had never realized she was solving. The gentle husband she loved and the powerful ruler feared across the kingdom had never been two different men. They had always been one. Behind her, faint echoes of approaching horses drifted across the hills. They were gaining ground. Evelyn tightened her grip on the reins, her heart steady despite everything she had learned. She was no longer running because she was afraid. She was running because for the first time since the day they met, Lucian Ashford was finally going to answer every question he had hidden behind his quiet smile. The narrow trail curved through towering pine trees before opening into a quiet meadow where wildflowers swayed beneath the growing warmth of the morning sun. Evelyn gently pulled on the reins, allowing midnight to slow for the first time since leaving the royal stable. The magnificent stallion snorted softly and lowered his head, as though sensing that this journey had never truly been about escape. She slid from the saddle and rested one trembling hand against the horse's neck. For a brief moment, silence surrounded her. Only the whisper of wind through the grass and the distant songs of meadow birds filled the valley. Yet her thoughts returned once again to the night that had changed everything. She could still remember waking just after midnight because of an unfamiliar sound beneath the cabin floor. Lucian was gone from their bed. A faint glow flickered through the cracks between the old wooden boards near the fireplace. Curiosity had quietly overcome trust. She discovered a hidden latch concealed beneath an antique rug, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Every careful step carried her farther away from the life she believed she understood. At the bottom of the stairs stood a chamber unlike anything that belonged beneath a humble blacksmith's home. Shelves lined with carefully rolled maps stretched across one wall. A polished suit of ceremonial armor reflected the candlelight with a silver shine. Beside it rested a sword bearing the royal wolf crest engraved into its hilt. There were sealed letters arranged with remarkable precision, each stamped with the insignias of distant packs whose names she had only heard in travelers' stories. One parchment lay open upon a heavy oak desk. She had not intended to read it, but a single sentence caught her eye before she could look away. Your Majesty, every alpha has accepted your decree. The Council awaits your return to Blackstone Castle before the Harvest Summit begins. Her breathing stopped. She read the line again and again, hoping exhaustion had somehow changed the words before her eyes. Then she noticed the signature at the bottom. Commander Rowan Mercer, Royal Guard. Suddenly every unanswered question from the past year rushed back into her memory. The expensive riding gloves Lucian claimed had been gifts from old friends. The polished signet ring he always removed before entering town. The respectful silence that surrounded strangers whenever he entered a room. None of it had been coincidence. She remembered hearing footsteps above her. Without thinking, she carefully returned every letter exactly where she had found it before slipping back upstairs moments before Lucian entered the cabin carrying fresh firewood, as though nothing unusual had happened. He smiled exactly as he always did and asked if she had slept well. She smiled back. She even thanked him for bringing more wood inside before the morning chill arrived. Neither of them mentioned the hidden room beneath their feet. For 3 long days she carried the weight of that discovery alone. She watched him laugh with neighbors, repair broken wagon wheels, comfort frightened children, and help elderly ranchers without ever asking for anything in return. Every kind gesture only made the secret hurt more deeply. She no longer knew which version of the man before her was real. Had she fallen in love with Lucian the quiet blacksmith, or with Lucian Ashford the Alpha King who had hidden behind an ordinary life? The answer mattered because despite the deception, her heart refused to stop recognizing the gentle man who had stood beside her through every difficult season. A distant echo interrupted her thoughts. Hoofbeats. Steady. Unhurried. Much closer now than before. Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes toward the tree line as a familiar figure emerged between the pines riding another dark horse, completely alone. There were no royal guards beside him this time. No banners. No soldiers. Only Lucian, his silver eyes meeting hers across the quiet meadow with the same calm expression that had first captured her heart one rainy afternoon a year ago. Lucian guided his horse to a quiet stop several yards away and remained seated without reaching for the reins of midnight or taking another step forward. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh earth between them while the valley rested in complete stillness, as though even nature understood this conversation had been waiting for an entire year. Evelyn folded her arms tightly across her chest, refusing to look away. She had imagined this moment 100 different ways during the sleepless nights since discovering the hidden chamber beneath their home, but none of those imagined conversations had prepared her for the calm expression on his face. There was no anger that she had taken his horse. There was no disappointment. There was only quiet patience, the same patience that had once comforted frightened children and repaired broken fences without asking for thanks. That calm unsettled her more than any raised voice ever could. "Are you finished running?" Lucian finally asked, his tone gentle enough to sound almost familiar. Evelyn shook her head. "I was never running from you," she replied. "I was making sure you could not run from me." For the first time since arriving, a faint smile almost appeared before quickly disappearing from his face. He slowly stepped down from his horse, keeping his hands visible as though approaching a frightened wild animal. "The guards will reach this valley soon," he said quietly. "I ordered them to stay behind, but they will not ignore my trail forever." Evelyn looked toward the distant hills before returning her attention to him. "Then you should answer quickly." She reached into the leather satchel hanging across her shoulder and carefully removed a folded letter. The royal seal reflected the sunlight as she held it between them. Lucian recognized it instantly. It had been lying open on the desk beneath their cabin the night she found the hidden room. His expression did not change, but his silence confirmed everything she already knew. "How long?" she asked. "How long have you been lying to me?" Several long seconds passed before he answered. "From the very first day we met." The honesty of those words landed harder than another excuse ever could. Evelyn lowered her eyes, remembering the rainy afternoon when a quiet traveler carrying a damaged horseshoe had first walked into her father's abandoned forge. Every smile, every shared meal, every promise spoken beneath the old oak tree. Had any of it belonged to the real man standing before her now? "Was any part of our marriage real?" she whispered. Lucian answered without hesitation. "Every feeling I have ever shown you has been real." Evelyn searched his face for uncertainty but found none. Only sincerity mixed with unmistakable regret. "Then why?" she asked, her voice barely stronger than the wind moving through the grass. "You could have trusted me." Lucian slowly looked toward the mountains where Blackstone Castle stood beyond the horizon. "A king carries burdens that can become dangerous for everyone standing beside him," he said. "The fewer people who knew where I truly lived, the safer they remained." Evelyn tightened her grip around the letter. "You made that choice for me." He nodded. "Yes." There was no attempt to defend himself. No clever explanation designed to soften the truth. His quiet admission carried more weight than any excuse could have offered. The distance between them suddenly felt much greater than the few yards of open meadow. She realized the deepest wound had never been his hidden crown. It had been losing the chance to choose whether she wanted to carry that secret beside him. Lucian took one careful step forward before stopping again. "You deserve every answer," he said softly. "But before I tell you why I became your husband, there is one truth you have not yet discovered. I did not find you by accident. I spent years searching for you before you ever learned my name." The words lingered in the quiet meadow long after Lucian spoke them. Evelyn stared at him, searching for even the smallest sign that he was hiding another layer of the truth, but his silver eyes held only calm honesty. "Years?" she asked softly. "You searched for me for years?" Lucian gave a slow nod. "Long before I ever walked into your father's forge." The morning breeze stirred the tall grass around them as he drew a careful breath. "When I became Alpha King, the council believed my first responsibility was to strengthen the alliances between the great packs. They prepared lists of noble daughters from respected families. Every meeting became another discussion about politics, influence, and bloodlines. They believed a queen should be chosen the same way a treaty was written." Evelyn listened without interrupting, her hands still wrapped around the folded letter. "But I never wanted a marriage built on negotiations," Lucian continued. "I wanted someone whose kindness existed even when no one was watching." He looked toward the distant hills before returning his gaze to her. "One winter, while traveling without my royal escort, I stopped in Pine Hollow during a heavy snowstorm. I intended to stay only one night." A faint smile touched his face as an old memory returned. "Instead, I watched a young woman close her father's shop early because an elderly rancher could not afford to pay for repairing his wagon wheel. She fixed it anyway and quietly placed fresh bread inside his wagon before he left. She believed no one had seen her." Evelyn remembered that day immediately. The rancher had been raising his grandchildren alone after losing his daughter. Helping him had never felt extraordinary. It had simply felt right. "That was you," Lucian said. "The next morning I learned your name." Evelyn lowered her eyes, struggling to understand why such an ordinary moment had remained so important to him. "So you investigated me?" she asked. "I observed," he answered gently. "There is a difference." He smiled with quiet embarrassment. "Whenever my duties brought me near Pine Hollow, I found another reason to pass through. Sometimes I asked your father unnecessary questions about horseshoes simply to hear you explain the answers. Sometimes I volunteered to repair fences because I knew you would bring lemonade during the afternoon. Every visit convinced me of the same truth." He paused before speaking the final words. "Your kindness never changed, whether you believed someone was watching or not." Evelyn felt memories rearranging themselves inside her mind. The stranger who had appeared so often. The quiet traveler who always seemed to arrive exactly when extra hands were needed. She had believed coincidence had slowly turned into love. Now she realized love had quietly arrived long before coincidence ever had. "Then why pretend to be someone else after we married?" she asked. Lucian's expression grew serious once more. "Because there were people searching for the Alpha King's greatest weakness." His voice remained steady, but the weight behind every word became impossible to miss. "If anyone discovered that my wife lived peacefully in Pine Hollow, your life would never belong to you again. Every smile offered by a stranger would deserve suspicion. Every visitor might carry hidden intentions. I wanted to give you one ordinary year before the responsibilities of my world found us." Evelyn looked around the peaceful meadow, realizing that ordinary year had indeed been the happiest season of her life. Yet it had also been built upon a truth she had never been allowed to know. Before she could answer, Midnight suddenly lifted his head and gave a low, alert snort. Both of them turned toward the edge of the forest where several riders had quietly appeared between the towering pines, their elegant blue cloaks marking them not as soldiers, but as members of the royal council who had apparently decided this conversation should never have happened in the first place. The ride back toward Blackstone Castle began beneath a sky washed clean by the afternoon sun, yet the silence between Lucian and Evelyn carried more weight than the miles stretching before them. The unexpected appearance of the royal council had forced every hidden truth into the open, and after hours of difficult conversations, Evelyn had finally heard the entire story. She now understood that an ancient prophecy had spoken of a queen whose compassion would unite divided packs before pride could tear them apart. Lucian had never searched for power when he found her. He had searched for the woman whose heart remained unchanged by hardship. Even so, understanding his reasons did not erase the pain caused by his silence. As the winding road climbed into the mountains, midnight suddenly slowed and lifted his ears toward the forest surrounding the trail. Lucian noticed it at the same moment. The birds had stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to hesitate among the towering pines. He quietly raised one hand, signaling the small escort behind them to remain calm. Evelyn looked around, sensing that something about the peaceful woods had shifted. Then, from deeper within the trees, a frightened whinny echoed across the hillside. A young chestnut mare burst from the forest, still dragging part of a broken wagon harness behind her. The frightened horse raced across the trail before stopping near Evelyn, trembling so badly that she could see its sides rising with every anxious breath. Without hesitation, Evelyn stepped forward with slow, reassuring movements. She spoke in the same gentle voice she had always used around injured farm animals back in Pine Hollow. The mare gradually lowered its head, allowing Evelyn to untangle the broken leather straps from its legs. Only then did an elderly couple emerge from the woods, exhausted after trying to calm the frightened animal. Their wagon had become stuck between fallen tree branches farther down the slope. They bowed deeply when they recognized Lucian, but before they could speak, Evelyn was already helping gather the scattered supplies that had rolled across the roadside. Lucian watched quietly as members of the royal council remained frozen beside their polished horses, uncertain whether assisting common travelers belonged beneath their station. Without saying a word, the Alpha King stepped down from his horse and joined Evelyn, lifting heavy crates back into the repaired wagon, while several royal guards quickly followed his example. One by one, the council members realized there was no dignified way to remain standing while their king worked with his own hands. Within minutes, everyone was helping. The frightened mare stood peacefully beside Evelyn, resting its nose against her shoulder, as though it had known her for years. The elderly woman smiled through grateful tears. "Your Majesty," she said softly to Lucian, "people always speak about the strength of the Alpha King, but today I understand why the kingdom follows you." Before Lucian could answer, she turned toward Evelyn. "Because he chose someone who reminds him how to be kind." Those simple words settled over the entire group. Several council members exchanged quiet glances, suddenly seeing the blacksmith's wife through different eyes. They had expected ambition, elegance, or political influence. Instead, they found a woman whose first instinct had been to comfort a frightened animal and help complete strangers before thinking about herself. Lucian met Evelyn's eyes across the roadside, and for the first time since the truth had come between them, either of them needed explanations. Actions had begun speaking louder than secrets ever could. Yet as the repaired wagon disappeared safely down the mountain road, Commander Rowan rode forward carrying a sealed message marked with the royal crest. He handed it to Lucian without a word. After reading only a few lines, Lucian's calm expression faded, and he slowly folded the letter before looking toward the distant towers of Blackstone Castle. "The entire kingdom is waiting," he said quietly. "And before this day ends, everyone will learn exactly who my queen truly is." By the time the royal procession reached Blackstone Castle, the setting sun had turned the stone towers into glowing shades of amber and gold. Hundreds of citizens filled the grand courtyard, their voices blending into a wave of curiosity as they watched the Alpha King return. Word had already spread across every district that something extraordinary had happened during the morning. Some whispered that the legendary stallion had been stolen. Others believed an enemy kingdom had challenged the throne. No one expected the truth standing quietly beside Lucian. Evelyn looked up at the towering castle gates with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Less than 2 days earlier she had believed herself to be nothing more than the wife of a humble blacksmith. Now every pair of eyes seemed fixed upon her as servants, guards, nobles, and council members lined the stone pathway leading toward the central balcony overlooking the kingdom. Lucian walked beside her instead of several steps ahead, as royal tradition demanded. That single decision did not go unnoticed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as members of the royal council exchanged uneasy glances. One senior noble quietly stepped forward before they reached the staircase. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, "perhaps the formal announcement should wait until the Harvest Summit. The council requires time to prepare the proper presentation." Lucian stopped walking. The entire courtyard fell silent. He turned toward the council member with the same calm expression Evelyn had come to know so well. "The truth has already waited long enough," he replied. Without another word, he continued climbing the wide stone staircase until he reached the balcony overlooking the thousands gathered below. Evelyn remained beside him, uncertain whether she belonged in such a place. Commander Rowan stepped forward and raised the royal banner, signaling for complete silence. The evening bells echoed across the castle walls before fading into the cool mountain air. Lucian looked over his people, not as a distant ruler, but as a man finally prepared to lay down the burden he had carried alone for far too long. "People of the Northern Territories," he began, his steady voice carrying across the courtyard. "For 1 year I asked you to trust my judgment while keeping part of my life hidden from every one of you. Today that ends." He reached for Evelyn's hand, and although surprise briefly crossed her face, she did not pull away. "This is Evelyn Carter Ashford, my wife." Gasps spread through the crowd. Many nobles stared in disbelief. Others searched one another's faces, wondering whether they had heard correctly. Lucian continued before anyone could interrupt. "She did not marry a king. She married a man she believed to be an ordinary blacksmith because I chose secrecy over honesty. That decision belongs to me alone." The honesty in his words silenced even the harshest critics. He did not blame duty. He did not blame tradition. He accepted responsibility without hesitation. Lucian then turned toward Evelyn, his expression softening with unmistakable sincerity. "Everything I hid was meant to protect you, but protection without trust becomes another kind of distance. For that distance, I ask your forgiveness before my entire kingdom." Evelyn felt the weight of thousands of eyes disappear in that single moment. She no longer stood before strangers judging her worth. She stood beside a man willing to humble himself rather than allow another lie to survive. Looking out across the sea of faces, she saw not suspicion but quiet curiosity slowly giving way to respect. An elderly rancher near the front of the crowd suddenly removed his hat. Moments later another citizen followed. Then another. Soon hundreds of people lowered their heads, not because royal protocol demanded it, but because they recognized genuine humility when they witnessed it. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, Evelyn realized that this was not the end of a hidden life. It was the first evening of a future where neither crowns nor secrets would ever again stand between two people who had finally chosen complete truth. The first light of dawn returned to Blackstone Castle the following morning, spilling across the ancient stone walls and filling the grand courtyard with a quiet golden glow that seemed to promise a new beginning. News of the Alpha King's public confession had already traveled beyond the mountains, reaching every village, ranch, and trading post throughout the Northern Territories. People arrived from every direction, not because they had been ordered to attend, but because they wanted to witness the moment history would remember. Evelyn stood near the balcony overlooking the gathering crowd, wearing a simple ivory gown chosen at her own request instead of the elaborate ceremonial robes prepared by the royal tailors. She wanted the people to see the same woman who had repaired wagon wheels, shared bread with strangers, and spent countless mornings beside a forge. A crown could change her responsibilities, but it would never change her heart. Lucian approached quietly, carrying a small velvet box rather than a royal scepter. He smiled with the same warmth she had first seen on a rainy afternoon inside her father's workshop. "There is one promise I have not yet fulfilled," he said softly. Evelyn looked at him with calm eyes that no longer searched for hidden meanings. The truth now stood openly between them, leaving no place for fear to hide. Together they stepped onto the balcony as thousands of voices faded into respectful silence. Commander Rowan announced the beginning of the ceremony, but before any formal tradition could continue, Lucian unexpectedly turned away from the assembled nobles and faced Evelyn instead. Every member of the royal council watched in complete surprise as the Alpha King slowly lowered himself onto one knee. A quiet gasp swept through the courtyard. Kings did not kneel. Alpha rulers certainly did not kneel in public. Yet Lucian remained there without hesitation, looking only at the woman before him. He opened the velvet box, revealing not a magnificent jewel but a simple silver ring shaped with intertwining oak leaves, crafted to resemble the old tree beneath which they had exchanged their wedding vows. "Evelyn Carter Ashford," he said clearly enough for every person to hear. "1 year ago I asked you to become my wife while hiding part of myself. Today I asked you once more, with nothing concealed between us. Will you stand beside me, not because I am your king, but because we have finally chosen truth together?" Tears shimmered in Evelyn's eyes, but her smile remained steady. She gently reached down and took his hand before helping him rise to his feet. "I never needed a perfect king," she answered. "I only needed an honest husband. And today, I have him." Warm applause rolled across the courtyard like gentle thunder, growing louder as more voices joined together. Even the oldest council members smiled, understanding that loyalty built upon honesty would always outlast authority built upon fear. Lucian carefully placed the silver ring on her finger before the ceremonial crown was brought forward. When the royal attendant offered it to Evelyn, she accepted it with quiet gratitude, then surprised everyone by placing one hand over the crown before it touched her head. She looked across the thousands gathered below. "If this crown ever separates me from the people who shaped my life," she said with gentle conviction, "then I will not deserve to wear it." The crowd answered with heartfelt cheers that echoed through the mountains. As the morning sun climbed higher into a clear blue sky, Lucian and Evelyn stood side by side upon the balcony, no longer bound together by secrets, prophecy, or obligation, but by trust freely chosen. In that moment the kingdom did not celebrate the power of an Alpha King or the rise of a new queen. It celebrated something far greater, the quiet truth that real strength walks beside kindness, and that the strongest hearts are the ones courageous enough to choose honesty, forgiveness, and love every single day.